Scripture reading this morning is from 1 Samuel chapter 17. I'll give you a minute to get there, even though you're probably going to recognize the story as soon as you look at it. It's going to be verses 23 to 27. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and the father's house expectation from tax, exemption from taxes. Then David spoke, and the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the men who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of that living God? And the people answered him in his manner, saying, so shall it be done to the men who kills him.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know which mic is working right now. This one all right? This one on, John? You know, many times as we go through life, we have our own ups and downs, and we have pinnacle experiences that we just, where we feel like God is so close to us that you can almost feel like you can reach out and touch him. Very similar maybe even to Elijah on Mount Carmel. Elijah was up there and he prayed and fire came down from heaven and completely consumed the sacrifice that was there. And then he was able to get rid of 850 prophets of Baal. And then again, later he prayed again, and after 3.5 years of no rain, rain comes. And then what does he do? He was able to actually get up, and he runs before the chariot, before Ahab, and says, we're going to get down to Jezreel. And he runs 22 miles down to Jezreel. But just like each one of us, what follows a mountaintop experience usually ends up with a situation of a big giant coming in. And Elijah's giant was a queen. This queen sent him a little note saying, I'm going to make you just like those prophets of Baal by tomorrow this same time. That was Elijah's giant. He was afraid. And when we are struggling, we walk headlong into our giant situations. Or as Elijah's position, he was actually threatened with death. Do you see the giants which make you fearful? Things so large and ominous that it almost takes your breath away, strikes fear into your heart. Things that keep all your attention focused to the point you are not sure where else to look. So you just look at your problems and they get bigger. Do you have giants in your life? Maybe your giant is you don't have a job. Or maybe your giant is a medical situation that you have to deal with. Or maybe your giant is just credit card and other debt that has piled up to the point you don't know what to do. Maybe your giant is just marriage issues or old-fashioned pride. Maybe your giant is you have issues with God or his church. Maybe you have several of these issues coming all at you at one time. It was just a couple of years ago that there was a TV program on, and it was called American Ninja Warrior. Many of you may have seen it. My mom used to love to watch it with these young people going through these different um, obstacles that they had to attain. And if you went to the city level, and you passed that, then you went to the regionals. And if you passed that, then you went to the national levels. And over 2,700 individuals attempted to go through these different obstacles, all having a chance for Mount Midoriyama. Now, Mount Midoriyama was not a regular mountain. It's just a man-made obstacle that they had created. But it was simply a 70-foot rope climb straight up, which you had to do in 30 seconds or less for $1 million. And out of all those 2,700 individuals who tried that, there were only 2 that have ever been able to accomplish that. There was one young man, though, that actually, when he started out in the city finals, he didn't get very far, but he had a t-shirt, and a lot of them had things on it. And right across the front of his shirt, it said, "Give me that mountain." Well, you're right if you're thinking about it, because his name was Caleb. But unfortunately, he didn't go very far. But, you know, my mind actually went right back to the Caleb of the Bible. And you think about the exploration that they did in the land of Canaan and how he gave such a good report. Take your Bibles with me, and let's turn to Numbers 13. We're going to be looking at several stories. We want to look at Numbers 13. And those of you with tablets or phones, I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. Numbers 13, we're going to start with 27. And here it's talking about the different individuals that went into the land. It says, "Then they told him and said, 'We went into this land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the bank of the Jordan.' Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it.' But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against these people. They're stronger than we are.' And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants,' or the sons of Anak, 'come right out, and we saw them. We were like grasshoppers in their sight, and so we were in their sight also.' So they made their search of the land." In verse 21, "They went and they spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went through the south and came to Hebron. The descendants of Anak were there. That was a giant-like people. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and they cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it between 2 of them on a pole." Who do you think that probably was that brought those enormous cluster of grapes back? I would like to think that it was Caleb and Joshua. Now, for those of you who may just want an amazing fact, do you know what the logo is for the Israeli tourism industry? It is simply 2 men carrying a very large cluster of grapes on a staff between them to honor the first tourists, Caleb and Joshua. So if you've ever gone to Israel, or if you ever see anything going on there, on buses, on the industry, There simply pictures two guys carrying a large cluster of grapes on a pole. Well, anyway, back to our story. So they said, "We're like grasshoppers." So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried. And all the children murmured against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said, "If we had died in Egypt, if we had only died in the wilderness, why has the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should become victims? It would have been better for us to return to Egypt." And they said, "Let's select another leader and return to Egypt." But 2 of the spies looked at the blessings, while 10 of the spies noticed everything that could be interpreted as negative. 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, as they went across the Jordan, they looked at the springs and the beautiful southern exposure there. They saw the palm trees around Jericho. They saw the dates, the oranges, the figs, the nuts, the clusters of grapes. And the 10 spies, all they could see were the walls of Jericho. They didn't know that God already had a contingency plan for the walls of Jericho. All they saw were the problems, the descendants of Anak. So, who were these descendants of Anak? Who made the children of Israel feel like grasshoppers and put such fear into their hearts, and even caused the Israelites to doubt their God? To get a better picture, we need to go back to 1 Samuel 17, and we're going to read a little bit about the story there. So 1 Samuel 17, verses 4, it says, "And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with coat of mail. And the weight of his coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, or about 140 pounds. He had bronze armor on his legs and bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood out and cried out to the armies of Israel and said, 'Why have you come up to fight for a battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose for you a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me.'" You know, sometimes we read this description of Goliath, who was a descendant of Anak, and the whole family, he actually had an entire family of individuals who resembled him both in size and nature. We don't get a true picture of what these people were really like. So if I could ask Matthias, would you be willing to come down here for a minute? Matthias is one of our new members, and I've asked him to come over here and help me out here just a minute. Now remember, we're looking at someone who's 6 cubits, and a cubit is from the here to the tip of your fingers. And for the average person, that would be about 18 to 20 inches. So in essence, Goliath was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. So we see Matthias, it seems like he's a pretty good sized boy, don't you think? But if we look here, help me, yeah. Now, with Matthias standing here, this is what Goliath would look like. This is about 9 feet, 9 inches here. So you can begin to understand, you begin to get a picture, if you had to look at somebody that was that tall, how you'd be just almost afraid of someone that size, wouldn't you? Even somebody the size of Matthias. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming up here. So when we look at that, you know, a staff and a sling, they're really not much protection, are they? But I want to tell you that David actually went with God against Goliath. And did you know he actually had armor that he was wearing? His armor was actually the breastplate of righteousness, and he had the helmet of salvation. He was escorted by none other than the living God. He was protected. He sensed that the skies were filled with chariots of fire, and the angels were there. You know, you're never alone unless you run ahead of God. The lowly David and his staff did not impress the uncivilized giant. David saw this towering hulk. It would make the best saint quake. But David was not afraid. You know why? Because David saw something else. David saw Jesus there. Jesus was his ally. Never forget, according to verse 47, the battle is the Lord's. This was not David's fight. It was God's fight. David had a positive attitude. Who appeared to the rest of the Israelites as a giant who was too big to fight, appeared to David as a target too big to miss. Too big to miss. What he faced was one of the largest foreheads in the world. What a target. I can't miss that. That was what David faced. And Goliath faced a smaller, much smaller individual, possibly the smallest target he had ever faced. Goliath only had one chance to accurately hurl his spear. David had 5 small stones. You know, we know the rest of the story, how Saul's army quickly came up, and they came up behind David, and they actually chased the army out completely. You know, what could have been a gigantic massacre became a massacred giant. What a day it was for God. Now, Saul may have mistakenly thought that Goliath was the biggest threat to God's people of all time, but that was wrong thinking. Actually, Goliath was not a threat. Goliath was a national opportunity for God to act. Whenever you see what seems to be great crisis, just know that it is almost accompanied by great opportunity. So what we have here is an opportunity. David used Goliath as his stepping stone. It was the blessing of Goliath. Let me restate that. It was the blessing of Goliath that actually turned David into a king. He never would have been a national hero, I don't think, without Goliath there. Goliath exposed David's leadership and his inner qualities. David became a great leader that day. Was he a leader before that? Not really. But he became a leader that day. A big crisis furnishes a leader with big opportunities. David probably would never have emerged as the great leader without the crisis. This crisis exposed his courage. The courage was there. The leadership potential was there. One brave deed made him a national hero. But David had even more run-ins with the giant clan. Because remember, there were many who were in that description. Let's go over to 2 Samuel 21. And here we actually see the faith of some of David's warriors as they fought these other giants. 2 Samuel 21, it starts out in verse 15. It says, "Moreover, the Philistines had yet another war against Israel. And David went down, and his servants with him, and fought against the Philistines. And David waxed faint. And Ishbi-bab, which was one of the sons of the giants, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he had a brand new sword that he thought to slay David with. But Abishai, the son of Zerah, secured him and smote the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore unto him, saying, Thou shalt go no more with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel." That's what they thought. He was the light of Israel. And it came to pass after this that there was again another battle with the Philistines of Gob. Then Sabashi the Hashite slew Saph, which was one of the sons of the giant. And there was again another battle in Gob, the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jehoram, a Bethlehemite, slew Lami, the brother of Goliath, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was yet another battle in Gath, and there was a man of great stature. They don't even talk about Goliath having great stature. But here this man had great stature, and he actually had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each feet. He was so large. And he was born to the giant. And when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, the brother of David, slew him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by his hand, of David, and the hand of his servants. You know, it's no wonder many times that we read about David and his servants and all the things that we're taking on. But we begin to wonder, were there other giants in the Bible who were really larger than life? So let's look at another descendant of Anak, the king of Bashan, whose name was Og. Let's turn over to Deuteronomy 3, and I'll be reading from the King James Version, Deuteronomy 3, and we're going to start with verse 3. Deuteronomy 3, verse 3. Then we turned and went up the way to Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. And the Lord said unto me, Fear him not, for I will deliver him and all his people and his land into thy hand. And thou shalt do unto him as thou didst unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, which dwell at Heshbon. So the Lord our God delivered into our hands Og, also the king of Bashan, and all his people, and we smote him until he was nothing left. And we took all the cities of that time. There was not a city which we did not take. 60 cities, in other words, 60 cities, all in the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All these cities were fenced with high walls, gates, and bars, beside unwalled towns a great many. And we utterly destroyed them as we did unto Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. But, you know, as I was reading this, I thought, why in the world did the Lord say in verse 2, do not fear him? Why do you think he would specifically say that to the children of Israel? I think if we go on down to verse 10, and I think it gives us a little bit more of a picture. It says, all the cities of the plain, and all Gilead, and all Bashan, and Salcath, and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnants of the giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. What did we just read about Goliath? He was 6 cubits tall. And here this King Og has a 15-foot solid iron bed that's 15 feet long and 6 feet wide. So if you stop and you think about that, if you take off just a foot or even 18 inches off of the head of bed, Og must have been close to 13 or 14 feet tall. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, with this representing Goliath at this point, Og would have been about this tall. So you can understand why God said, don't fear him. And if he had a whole tribe of individuals who were like this, can you imagine walking up and seeing an individual this massive with a solid bed of iron. So here we actually can see a little picture of why the Israelites felt like grasshoppers when they were dealing with these individuals. But now back to our story. We need to face our giants as Caleb and David did. We don't need to be afraid. Maybe we fear because we underestimate God so much. Whatever your problem is, let Jesus go with you out of your valley and into the mountain and face the giants with you. Jesus is in control. He can be our fortress. You know, sometimes we wonder why David's army and his mighty men who were with him were so feared. We read if you turn over with me to 2 Samuel 23, and it gives a list of the 37 individuals who were on David's elite squad. So if 2 Samuel 23, and if we start with verse 8, it starts listing some of these individuals and some of what they have done. These are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Joshbab the Tachnite, chief among the captains. He was called Adino the Enzite because he had killed 800 men at one time. Not over his lifetime. 800 men in one battle. And after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Alahathite, one of the three mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle, and the men of Israel had retreated. Okay, do you get the picture? He's in the war with the men of Israel, and all the men of Israel retreat. He arose and attacked the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand stuck to his sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day through one man, and the people returned after him only to plunder. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agi the Herite. The Philistines had gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils. Then the people of Israel fled from the Philistines. But this one guy, he stationed himself in the middle of the field, defended it, and killed the Philistines. And the Lord brought about a great victory. Then 33 of the chief men went down at that time to David at the camp of Adullam. And the troop of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in a stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines were in Bethlehem. So in other words, the Philistines had control of Bethlehem. And David said with longing, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." So these three mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well, and went clear back and took it to David and gave it to David. It says, nevertheless, he would not drink it, but he poured it out to the Lord as a thank offering. And he said, "Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is this not the blood of the men who went in jeopardy for their lives?" Therefore he would not drink it. These things were done by these three mighty men. And now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zerah, was chief of the other three. He lifted his spear against 300 men, killed them, and won a name for himself. Was he not the most honored of these? Therefore he became the captain. However, he did not attain to the first three. And then Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of the valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. And then he went up against an Egyptian, and they just classify him as a spectacular man. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand, so he went down to him with a staff, wrestled the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. These things Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, did, and won a name among the three mighty men. Now, these were just a list of some of the things that were taking place. through David's and through the men who had faith in God to help them out in these battles. So we need to face our giants. Take the opportunity to allow God to make you prosper. Don't be afraid. Maybe we fear things because we underestimate God so much. Just remember, Jesus is in control. So now let's go back to our story about Caleb. He's actually asked for the mountain filled with giants as his inheritance. Joshua 14, verse 6 says, Then the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite said to him, You know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. And I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made their hearts of the people to melt. But I wholly followed the Lord my God. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance, and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord your God. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years since the Lord spoke the word to Moses, while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now here I am this day, 85 years old. As yet I am strong this day as the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now my strength is for war, both for going out and for coming in. Now therefore, give me this mountain, of which the Lord spake in that day. For you heard in that day how Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as he said. And Joshua blessed him and gave him Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as his inheritance. So here we see Caleb, 85 years old, asking to face the giants of Anak. The Israelites are dividing up the country and conquering it. He could have asked for any place in all the land of Israel. But because he had been so faithful to God. His faith in God was still as strong as it was when he was 40 years old and wanted to go into the land immediately and possess it. Caleb was ready and asking to go after the giants. What do you have in your life? What giants do you face? I have a good friend, and he's been here a couple times, so I won't give you his name, but he just inevitably had problems with his vehicles and his family. And for years, he had flat tires. He had cars break down. He actually had a couple small accidents that weren't his fault, but it still made his car completely unfixable. So due to his financial situation, he had no money to replace his car, so he started walking to work about a mile from his house all this last winter. Finally, about a month or two ago, he asked the Lord, Lord, I really need a vehicle to get back and forth to work. This was his giant. He had no vehicle, and he had no money, just a little bit of faith. But he not only asked for a vehicle, he said, Lord, I would really like a pickup. 1 week passed, then 2 weeks passed, and then he was talking to some guys who came into his place where he worked, and he just happened to mention that he had to walk a mile to and from work every day. You know, one of the men said, well, you know what? We have a vehicle at the shop we're not using, and it runs good. It's an older pickup, but you would have, and we would love to give it to you for free. His giant fell. Are you ready for your giants to fall? One of the things we need to remember is that our God is in the business of conquering giants. What is your giant? Are you ready with Jesus' help to face your giants? Are you willing to let Jesus lead? Our closing song is hymn number 619, Lead On, O King Eternal.